We're continuing with the Beis HaLevi, the tractate on certainty that God Almighty is taking care of us in every time and every place. And we said last week that in chapter 26, we said that when a person has trust in God Almighty, they will be saved from many different transgressions. And the one that the Beis HaLevi focuses on last week in chapter 26 and now today in chapter 27 is we're going to see is focusing on the concept of flattery. Flattery is a terrible, terrible transgression. Why is flattery such a terrible transgression? Because it indicates that we feel dependence on someone other than God Almighty for a certain result. Now, there's nothing wrong with complimenting a person. There's nothing wrong with trying to persuade a person to see your point of view and do something that you feel is important and you feel is the right thing to do. But when you use flattery to try to manipulate the person, which is flattery is an attempt to manipulate. What does it mean, manipulation? Manipulation means that you or I, whoever is being the manipulator in that particular circumstance, is unable to accept the possibility that it's going to turn out differently than the way I want it to be. So therefore, I have to work on making sure that I'm constantly navigating each person or each item into the right result, the way I understand the right result to be. So one way to manipulate a person is you could do consequences, you could do threats and so forth. But another way is to do flattery. And flattery is to tell a person something that is intended to get them to change overwhelm their thinking, or to bribe them through the flattery into doing something that you want. But a person who trusts in God Almighty is not going to need to do that. He's going to say, this is what I would like. You could say good morning to the person. You could say that, wow, something nice about the person. But you're not doing it to manipulate the person. You're doing it because you want to be pleasant and you want to be able to have a social conversation with the person and to offer words of encouragement, offer words of support, offer words of appreciation, admiration, respect, and so forth. That's permissible. But when a person is going to now try to flatter the person, he's saying, I can't leave this up to God Almighty. I have to go and take extraordinary measures to try to rework the situation to the outcome that I want. So in a sense, it's actually denying that God Almighty is the one who's controlling every decision and controlling every outcome and controlling every action, every single detail that's happening in creation. So let's look inside now. Here we are. You can see over here, chapter 26 in the top, 27, I keep saying 26. 27. Eid Isa. It's also brought in the Talmud in the Masechta Seita. Kol Adam sheyesh by chanufa afilu iburin shebimei iman mekalen. They say anyone who has this aspect, who does flattery, even the fetuses in the wombs of their mothers curse him. Shenema, like it says in the book of Proverbs. Let's pull this up now. You should be seeing the book of Proverbs in front of you, and we're going to jump over to, I'm sorry, this is Yeshaya, but going over to the book of Proverbs. We're in chapter 24, and we are going to verse 24. It says, Eimer l'rasha tzadikata, yikavuhu amim, yizamuhu le'umim. He who says to a wicked man, you are righteous. So now he's saying that's something that's not true. He's telling a wicked man, you are so wonderful, you're so righteous. Then it's not just that it's a transgression against God Almighty and it's saying falsehood, but also people are going to curse him for doing this because it's so low to change the truth in order to try to get your result. And nations will be wroth with him, will be angry at him. So the Beis HaLevi is saying we see here a scriptural source for the concept that this is such a low type of activity to flatter a person with falsehoods, is just something that everyone is repulsed by. Because it really shows, like I said, it shows that you can't stick to the truth. The person's not able to stick to the truth because he's afraid. It's really an act of fear. And therefore he has to pervert the truth in order to take care of his fear, manage his fear. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Elazar said that any man that has flattery falls into Gehenna, state of purgatory, a state of just the tribulations of the soul. Shenemar, like it says, I'm going to see over here in Prophet Isaiah, chapters, hold up the wrong chapter, it should be chapter 5, verse 20. Woe is to those to say of evil that it is good, and of evil that it is, of good that it is evil. Woe to those that say that evil is good, and that good is evil. Samim cheshech la'er. They present darkness as being light. They present light as darkness. Samim mar limasek lamar, and they present bitterness is something sweet, and sweet is something bitter. So they corrupt the entire world. So the Beis HaLevi continues over here. And it says also, let's look at now in the same chapter in verse 24. V'chashash lahava yirpeh sharsham kamak pircham ka'avak ya'aleh ki masu es teras adonai tzava'es ve'es imras kadesh yisrael ni'etzu. So therefore, it's like a flame consuming stubble, and the way the flame shrivels straw, their roots shall be like rot, and their blossoms shall go up like dust, for they have rejected the law of the Lord of hosts, of God Almighty, and the word of the Holy One of Israel they have despised. This is talking about all these people that are corrupt, including those that are flattery in verse 20. But Amar Rabbi Elazar continues, Kol hamachni for l'rasha seif neifel biyadei. Now this is really, really a wake-up call for all of us. Anyone who is flattering a wicked man, in the end he will fall into his hands. This is really, really sobering. And it's important for us to recognize, because we see in what's transpiring in the world around us, there's people that decide when a government official puts in a decree, an order that's wrong and goes against the rights of the people, goes against God Almighty and goes against the people, the right thing to do is to tell him that he's doing the wrong thing. But some people decide that instead they're going to praise the person, they're going to flatter the person, tell him how wonderful he is and how righteous he is. And I've heard tape recordings of some of these conversations, and they are truly, truly repulsive to listen to, the way praise is given to these people. And in the end, it says, Rabbi Elazar says, the person who does that is going to fall into the hands of that person, in the hands of that wicked person. We actually saw this play out in real time, meaning to say those rabbis who said that they are not going to close their yeshivas, are not going to close their synagogues, they are going to continue to have communal prayer, they're going to continue to Torah learning in public, and continue the dedication of the children into God Almighty, into the dedication of children into the service of God Almighty, in chadarim, in yeshivas. They did possibly suffer some harassment, and there were inspections and so forth, but they just kept going. But the people who said to the government officials, oh, you're so wonderful and we support you and we're going to do whatever you want and so forth, they were shut down. They were actually ended up completely in the hands. They fell completely into the hands of these people. And one of the recordings I heard, which was particularly disturbing, was there was a governor of a particular state that Northeast United States, and he was making war against the synagogues, making war against the yeshivas, making war against public gatherings and so forth. And there was a recording where the rabbis were praising him that they were on this particular, who had this unfortunate attribute of flattery and who did fall into his hands. But it was interesting to listen. It was so repulsive to listen to the way that they flattered him. And so against the Torah, and so against God Almighty, to flatter a man who's doing wicked things that we knew about at the time were wicked, and yet they were flattering him, and they did fall into his hands, that he then used that. See, the point is, when you flatter the person, that person you're flattering takes control of you because you show your hand that you're really afraid of him. So it's easy. Once you flatter him, he's like, oh, you think you got him, he's got you. But then it was revealed that this particular man that they were praising, how wonderful he was harassing his own staff members. And his own personal conduct was repulsive. His personal conduct and his conduct among his other government employees. And he eventually resigned. The others around him ganged up on him and forced him to resign. So we see the total disgrace of that level of flattery. Because not only do people hate it, not just is hateful to the God Almighty, it's hateful to all human beings, hate that flattery. And the person who's being flattered hates the people he's flattering him because he knows it's not true. And it strengthens his hand instead of being set right and someone coming to him and telling him, you are on the wrong course. I'm here to do you a favor and tell you you're on the wrong course. You're not doing what's right in God's Almighty's will and God Almighty's spirit. You're going against God Almighty. That's what a real person connected to the God Almighty and Torah would say. So when the person comes and gives him flattery and tells him how wonderful he is and he's doing everything right and so forth, the person who he's flattering hates the person who's flattering because he knows it's not true. He knows he's not a good person. Not only in the things that we know about, the things that he's being flattered for, but he's also wicked behind the scenes. So this is the people that said they're not going to follow illegitimate decrees. They decided that they're going to serve God Almighty. They didn't fall into the hands of these wicked people, and they were able to keep going in doing God's will. But the people who chose to flatter, they fell into the hands of the wicked and were despised by the wicked. And they themselves fell, showing us that the judgment of those people who are flattering them is completely missing. They're completely missing because they're afraid, because they're fearful people, full of fear. That's what brought them to that. They're not trusting in God Almighty. This is what the Beis HaLevi is saying over here. So this needs to be said clearly because we need to learn from this. We need to learn from this. So when you're flattering someone, you're lying to his face about how good he is, you will be dragged into him, you will fall into his hands, and he will be revealed to the world how repulsive your flattery was, because it will be revealed how low this person really is. The world is going to find out. So don't think you're going to get an advantage. You're actually going to fall into the trap of this wicked person that you're praising. Any congregation that has flattery is something that's not appropriate in such an extent. Like, for example, when a woman is in her menstrual state, then her husband is not allowed to come into physical contact with her because this is a time that she's going through a cycle and needs to come back to ritual purity because of the sensitivity to spiritual purity and impurity. It's something that a person has to be cognizant of in a respectful way, and the person is not allowed to come into contact. So it's something that is, a person is going to be careful not to come into contact with his wife during that time, because this is her time to go through her process, and it's not something that he's supposed to be blurring those lines and boundaries. So a person should see that a congregation that has that he has to separate himself from that with the same degree of alacrity that he would from his wife when she's not permissible to him. Shenemar, like it says in the book of Job, and by the way, we see Rabbi Yonasan Steif brings down that this is something that all the nations of the world had the custom for husbands and wives to be separate during a woman's cycle. That was largely lost among the nations, or we don't see that so much practiced today, but it was something that traditionally from the beginning of time was something that all human beings were cognizant of and were careful about. And that's something we're going to be learning about that later on in the Rabbi Steif Shir on Sunday mornings. But this is something that human beings recognize as a time that a husband and wife should not be together. And the Torah has specific instructions on how to honor that and how to bring about that separation and the reunion in a proper way and in a happy and holy way. That is something that we'll be studying more in the Rabbi Steif Shir. So we're now in chapter 15, verse 34. Because the company of a hypocrite is lonely, and a fire consumes the tents of bribery. And Rabbi Elazar says any community that has flattery is in the business of flattery. In the end, they're going to be exiled. Masechta Shabbos, Isa, in the Talmud Tractate of Shabbos, Isa kol hamenabel piv mamikim legehenim. Anyone who's going to disgrace his mouth, they're going to sink him into Gehenna, into purgatory. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar afilu shomea b'sheisek, even a person who hears this going on and stays quiet and doesn't protest it, Shem Nemar, like it says in the book of Proverbs. Go back to the book of Proverbs, over here, chapter 22. Chapter 22, verse 14. Shucha amukapi zares v'zum adnoi yipol sham. The mouth of a strange woman is like a deep pit, that one abhorred of the Lord will fall therein. This is from Proverbs. So if you're not speaking out against this, if you listen and you kind of see sitting at a meeting and they're flattering someone and saying falsehood, and you listen and you don't protest it, then person says the terrible consequences for the person. So what are you supposed to do? You were supposed to do is, if you trust in God Almighty, you're not going to say words of flattery. You're not going to tell a person he's righteous when he's evil. You're going to tell him what needs to be done properly. And if you're in that meeting and one of your colleagues is flattering, you have to speak up and say, I'm sorry, I can't hear this. What, Mr. Governor or Mr. So-and-so, what you're doing is wrong. It's wrong in the eyes of God, and I do not concur with my colleagues' praises to praise you as doing the right thing. It's simply not true. You're doing the wrong thing and you must stop it. And here's now the opportunity to stop it. That's the proper way to speak with confidence. And certainly the God Almighty is taking care of us because we know that everything is in the hands of God Almighty and nothing is going to happen to us without God Almighty's decree. So therefore we have no fear about saying what needs to be said. And on the contrary, that's the proper contribution to the well-being of every single human being when we say the right thing in every single situation. So this is what the Beis HaLevi is telling us how we're supposed to live life. This is what we will avoid by having certainty that God Almighty is taking care of us at all times, in all places, and how we will conduct ourselves in not saying these things, and how we will stop or protest when other people do show flattery, because it is a matter not only of saving yourself when you protest it, but it's a matter of saving the community from the terrible things that are described that we've quoted already, which should not happen. God willing, people will return from their flattery, do tshuva, and God willing, the communities will be completely grow and with great joy and great simcha and health and parnasa and nachas, and be able to flourish because God Almighty should have rachmanas on them and us, and take us out of this exile. Any questions? Okay. We will see you soon.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Rabbi. This was a very good class. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Spread the message of hope. And don't forget, those that are watching online, they should like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you,
Bye.
Rabbi.
You're welcome. Nice seeing you all.